We have another Jeff Hardy arrest. Another Jeff Hardy arrest, another mugshot to add to his collection. TMZ broke the news that Hardy was arrested on Thursday night in North Carolina for DWI, driving while impaired, his second DWI offense in as many years, as well as driving with a revoked driver's license. That's nice. The last DWI, Jeff was in a car accident. His blood alcohol content was 0.25, more than 3 times the legal limit. And he was just arrested in July for public intoxication. At least then, if you think back to when he was arrested a few months ago, he wasn't behind the wheel of a car. This time, he was. He was behind the wheel. And if you've heard me talk about these kinds of stories in the past, I have very little tolerance for this kind of thing myself. You know, we're not talking about one beer. We're not talking about one glass of wine. He's been out since having knee surgery in May. He and his brother Matt, they were forced to vacate the SmackDown Tag Team titles right after they won them. He underwent knee surgery. He's been out ever since. And WWE, they copy and pasted their usual statement, which is Jeff Hardy is responsible for his own actions. And that was it. A one-line statement from WWE. His brother Matt echoed that statement and is clearly very irritated by all of this. And really, how can he not be? I mean, he's so closely associated with his brother, the Hardy Boys. They're linked. They're forever linked. And so every time Jeff gets into trouble of some kind, and Matt knows what that's like because Matt went through a period of his life where he was getting in trouble and he was in a dark place and he was going down a road that, there was almost no coming back from. So Matt is really this great redemption story where he was able to overcome those demons and get his career back, and he hit it big with the Broken Matt character in TNA, had this big comeback to WWE, that big WrestleMania surprise return. He's got a wife, he's got 2 kids, another on the way. He's building a little Hardy clan for himself over there. And it's a great story. And Jeff, unfortunately, is not such a great story. And so every time something happens with Jeff, I'm sure Matt gets a ton of tweets and a ton of messages from people. What's going on with Jeff? How's Jeff? And if I were Matt, if that were my brother, I'd be pretty irritated by the whole thing too. So I can understand it, but this is what he tweeted. He said, since so many have asked me about my brother, I love my brother. I want him to be happy and healthy. I've expressed that to him as much as I can. Jeff has to make decisions about his own life. I have to focus on my 2 boys and soon-to-arrive son. I can only control my actions. And he put the word my in all caps. The old expression, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink, I think applies here. I don't know how much more of this WWE can tolerate. It is embarrassing for them to have to keep putting out statements like this. I remember the Umaga situation where he had his own demons. And I don't remember if it was alcohol or drug related or what it was, but WWE tried to force him to go to rehab. It was that bad where they tried to force him to go to rehab and he refused. And he forced their hand. They had no choice. So they fired him. And his story didn't end well. I would like to see Jeff Hardy's story end well. This company needs to draft a policy. It's sad that it's even come to this, but between Jeff and the Usos alone, you could put together an entire scrapbook, an entire photo album of mugshots. They need to put down on paper a policy, specifically in reference to alcohol abuse and arrests for DUI and DWI. I don't know if it's a 2 strikes policy, if you make it a 3 strikes policy, but something so that it's not a case where, if it gets to a point where they're going to fire Jeff, clearly they're not, it doesn't look like they're going to here, but let's say they get to a point where he gets arrested again and they just say, you know what, we have to get rid of this guy if he keeps getting arrested for DUI or DWI. You don't want to be in a situation where you let go of him or someone else and then people say, well, wait a minute, that's not fair. How come they got rid of Jeff or how come they got rid of this person but Jimmy Uso still has a job. How do you reconcile that? How do you measure that? So I think you need to have a uniform policy that applies to everybody when it comes to this sort of thing, since it happens so often. And I know they're independent contractors, and that's where that WWE statement comes from. Well, they're independent contractors, so he's responsible for his own actions. So the only policy they have prohibits the use of alcohol for a 12-hour window before they perform. That is outlined in the WWE substance abuse policy, which is online for anybody to read. And that is the only section in there that applies to alcohol abuse. But they need something more. They need something more to dissuade these guys from being stupid and potentially losing their jobs. Jeff's got 2 kids. Enough! I mean, what's the law there in North Carolina? Don't they have those ignition locking devices? I think it's called like an alcohol ignition lock or some such thing, where if you get in your car, you have to like blow into this device before you can start the engine. And if your score is too high, if your blood alcohol is too high, the car won't start. The car simply will not start. His license was already revoked, and that didn't stop him from getting behind the wheel. Maybe a device like that should be mandatory after a certain number of arrests. Next time it may not just save his life, it could save somebody else's life too. I just read a story in the New York Post yesterday about this band Wild Bell. It's like a brother and sister band or duo. They were going to perform at Radio City Music Hall. They just had to cancel their gig at Radio City Music Hall because their father was killed in a car accident by an alleged drunk driver. And I think the drunk driver died as well, which is kind of unique because you read a lot of these stories and they're angering. Because more often than not, the drunk driver walks away with barely a scratch on them. It's somebody else who loses their life. In this case, a whole bunch of people died, including their dad. Just read about that yesterday. And these kind of stories happen all the time. It's actually quite amazing that whether it's Jeff or other wrestlers, you read about these arrests and them getting behind the wheel and blowing these astronomical numbers into these breathalyzers, that sort of thing doesn't happen more often. I don't want to read about that sort of thing. I don't want that to happen. It's one thing to be caught passed out in a stairwell like he was over the summer. He's not hurting anybody. He's not hurting anybody but himself. It's very different to be blitzed out of your mind and get behind the wheel of a 2-ton vehicle. That's not going to end well for anybody.